Hello and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as 50 hours, but hey, it's something. Now, as you can see, this is another one of those gosh darn visual episodes. Why this early? Well, if you know anything about the community tab, you know why it's this early. Ooh boy. But before we get into that, we're going to shout out the smaller channel of the day. Today's smaller channel is a channel called Critical Dispatch. This is a person who's, for lack of a better term, they're pretty similar to a YouTuber by the name of Second Thought, but in a different way. Like, for example, let's just take a look at the video quality of this person. Just look at this. I'm not even playing the audio, but just look at this. This person puts a crap ton of effort into their videos. I'm assuming that that's them that did that, but they do that for a lot of other types of content. And overall, I think that's really good. This person definitely deserves a lot more. This is one of the few people that I've shouted out that I've actually subbed to. That doesn't even make sense considering the people that I've shouted out already. The only one I haven't subscribed to is the second one. But you get my point. This person definitely needs a bit more subs. So, yeah. But now let's move on to something that I technically probably should have talked about at one other point. I'm going to talk about the Australian federal election for a little bit. And I'm wondering, why isn't this getting a full podcast in out of itself? Well, you see, the thing is, I actually didn't know that the Australian federal election was coming up. I thought it was pretty far off, but no, it's actually pretty close. And honestly, I didn't think there was going to be anything interesting of the election. That was, however, until I started looking at these two. And basically, here's the thing. For those who don't know, this is how Australian politics is. It's there's a right-wing coalition, then there's the main left-wing party, then there's a smaller left-wing party, and then there are these guys which are pretty much center. And this is really big. This is really big only because of these two that I want to talk about. First, normally I would have supported the Greens, because I supported the Greens the last time. I liked Richard Di Natale. Well, I want to check out, why did he resign? Let me see. Di Natale resigned as leader of the Greens and announced the intention to resign from the Senate, citing family responsibility. Oh, he just, phew. For a second there I was wondering, why did he resign? But it's no, the dude just resigned just because he wanted to take care of his family. That's noble. But Bant is actually interesting for basically this reason. This is one thing that really confused me. You expect what's the Australian Green Party? The Australian Green Party's ideologies, it's basically one of the more left-wing Green Parties. Aside from the US Green Party, it's progressive, anti-neoliberal, generally left-wing. But you don't expect them to go that far left. That is until you meet Bant. Bant is literally a post-Marxist. Which, for those who don't know, post-Marxists are basically the people who are to the left of Marxism. Like Slavoj Žižek. This is the guy that the Australian Greens idealizes, essentially. Pretty interesting, in my opinion. So anyways, the next one, the next person, the reason why he's important, Anthony Albanese, the reason why I didn't care that much was because of the last guy, Bill Shorten. But here's the thing. Albanese is part of the Labour left faction, which is essentially the Corbynite faction, the Socialist, Social Democratic, Progressive faction. And the reason why I'm even talking about it to begin with is because, due to this, it seems that the Labour is actually going to be doing really well. I find that very interesting, to say the very least. So anyways, now let's move on to a more general news story about a foreign country. El Salvador. I'm moving this ahead so I can move on to this story, to that one. El Salvador's Bitcoin bond has reportedly not lured a single investor, and markets are bracing for a default on conventional debt. Investors aren't flocking to El Salvador's Bitcoin bond, and in fact the crypto-backed offering hasn't drawn a single buyer according to Bloomberg. Millennial President Nayib Bukele is seeking $1 billion for a crypto-backed bond, though instead of financing, he's received skepticism from credit agencies and the International Monetary Fund. The IMF previously criticized Bukele's plan to make Bitcoin a legal tender and has called for the government to reconsider its reliance on the cryptocurrency. Now El Salvador's conventional bonds, due in 2032, yield 24% of a steep level that suggests markets perceive the debt to be high risk and are bracing for a default. So, it seems that the right-wing crypto bro trying to, his way to try and remove himself from the IMF clearly isn't panning out, because he is going to be defaulting pretty soon, and I guess being the dictator of El Salvador wasn't worth it. There's not much else I can really say about this, so let's move on to the next one. The French left is actually going to have a W for once, because they've agreed to a coalition to take on Macron. This was all, basically the entire coalition was being bent around the French Socialist Party, and the French Socialist has finally agreed, yes. So now, we're going to be having a coalition of a lot of parties: La France Insoumise, the Left Party, Ensemble, Picard Debout, Ecological Revolution for the Living, Europe Ecology the Greens, Génération.s, the New Democrats, Ecology Generation, Socialist Party, Place Publique, and the French Communist Party have all agreed that for this legislative election, they will be working together. And the thing is, many people say that this is basically the only reason that the French left didn't do so hot in the last cycle, and by the last cycle I mean literally a little bit ago. The one controversial part was basically how they would divide the coalition. From what I remember, the French Socialist Party is going to be getting, it would be getting the smallest amount of seats. And that has led to a lot of controversies. So, basically, the issue is, truly, how is this going to pan out? Currently in the Senate, they have 64 seats, 106, 27 in the European Parliament. But basically, as you can tell, I don't know if this is, big or small comparatively, but this is just for this election cycle. They probably have more running, and as such, there's probably going to be a lot more going into things. So we'll have, again, wait and see how things pan out. Speaking of things that we're going to have to wait and see pan out, the Supreme Court has voted to overturn abortion rights, draft opinion shows. The Supreme Court has voted to strike down the landmark Roe v. Wade decision according to an initial draft majority opinion written by Justice Samuel Alito circulating inside the court and obtained by Politico. The draft opinion is full-throated, unflinching repudiation of the 1973 decision, which guaranteed federal constitutional protections of abortion rights, and subsequent 1992 decision, Planned Parenthood v. Casey, that largely maintained the right. Roe was egregiously wrong from the start. We hold that Roe and Casey must be overruled. Now here's the thing. There are a lot of people who are getting really, really, really mad at this, but not for the right reasons. See, there are a lot of people who are getting mad at this for saying, just because it was a draft opinion that was leaked. Hold on, let me see which is the one I'm talking about. You can tell what I'm looking up. Obergefell? No. V. Hodges. Let me see. Here it is. This is the part that I'm talking about. I haven't talked about it yet, but I'm going to. It's basically explaining how this is going to... Why won't the picture load? Okay, fine. I guess let's just do it here. So let me see. Basically, what he was citing, like during this hearing, he was basically saying like, oh, but the problem is like we need to understand that this decision isn't as good as it is, and he cites a bunch of other decisions that isn't like Obergefell v. Hodges, but another one that he cites for not liking is the one that ended the U.S.'s sodomy laws, and it's like that's weird. Like, and here's the thing: while this is going on, I'm literally editing a video where I'm talking about the Supreme Court. I guess I finally was able to get my relevancy for the video again, because I've been talking about like how on and off this video has been getting. I should have done it during the Coney Barrett hearings. I should have done it during the whatever. Like, I was like, I could have done it during the Coney Barrett hearings, but I didn't do it. I could have done it during the Jackson hearings. I guess I didn't do it then. But now I'm getting it back to relevancy again. Okay. But speaking of things that are relevant, we should talk about some election news that happened in the United States. And that's where some sad news happened, because Nina Turner sadly lost again. And I will have to say, I know I should have prepared this ahead of time, I know, but I'm dropping, because I'm about to review my hot take again. I guess I should go in through my hot take first, wherever it is. None of these are my hot takes. Okay, here's my hot take. I basically decided to drop a huge hot take during Nina Turner's election. And I'm just gonna read the thread word for word and then play the video that is associated with the thread. About to drop a really hot take for left Twitter. I was 95% sure that Nina Turner was going to lose Ohio District 11, and to be honest, I thought everyone else did too. But I have seen too many people basically be borderline suicidal due to the results that I literally just have to talk about it. And when I say that, I don't mean it in a satirical sense. I mean literally. I had people crying and being depressed. Like, Humanist Report, in his video, he was like, he talked like this was like truly the end-all be-all. That this was like the true end-all be-all. And I'm like, I was perplexed that people were this mad at this election cycle. And I was like, look, I get it. New district, less candidates, an election to look back on to improve yourself. It's a pretty different race. But you know what else made it different? Chantel had the advantage of incumbency. And as I pointed out in the postmortem of the 2021, Chantel was not as egregious as others. To the average voter in the district, they do not see much difference between the two. No racial. I mean policy-wise. Sure, we spend all of our days online and we can see all the corporate PAC money and specific policies, etc., etc. The average voter doesn't. And this is true, like, a lot of voters probably literally just were like, hey, either of these two would make fine members of the House of Representatives. Like, the Nina Turner ads didn't hit, like, of them, like, saying bad stuff about Nina, and a lot of the Nina Turner attack ads against Chantel Brown wouldn't go good either. They really just cared about the two themselves. And I even point out, like, Pocan went on NBC, basically equating the two. Let me see. I'm going to scrub to the point.
In your caucus,
and when we took the vote, no one voted not to endorse Chantel. So I don't know if the divide that, you know, some of the journalists in Washington, D.C., for some of the capital newspapers like to say, but we didn't have it when we endorsed someone. And, you know, the good news is you've got two great progressives running. I mean, we like this option. What I don't want to have options is where we got people who are, you know, not going to be supporting things like Medicare for all and other priorities. Here you've got people who are, and I think at the end of the day, that's good for the people of Ohio and good for the American people, but people in that district will ultimately make the decision.
All right.
You see, he was saying, like, he's like, there was no problem. What he saw was two candidates endorsing Medicare for all. That's what he saw, and that's what a majority of other people probably saw. Like, they didn't, maybe not specifically Medicare for all, but, like, they saw, like, oh, these are just two great progressive candidates running. Like, that's probably what they saw. And I was literally saying, and I was saying this point blank because it was like, again, I was so perplexed that people didn't even think of this. Chantal was literally in office for 2 months. Nina challenged her, like, she challenged her tenure. Like, she challenged Chantal Brown, like she challenged her 2 months into her tenure. Nina's campaign was literally longer than that. Like, Nina's campaign was 3 months. Chantal was literally in office for 2 months before Nina decided to challenge her. So in total, it's 5 months in office. That's not enough time for there to be good or bad in regards to her legislative priorities. People don't know, like, a positive or negative record. If Chantal Brown had an extremely negative, very vocal record, then maybe they would have changed their mind. But a majority of people don't see that, especially in this cycle. We're not going to be seeing a lot of primary bids against incumbent congresspeople work. Because, especially considering everybody keeps saying it, like, even progressives keep saying it, like, oh, the Democrats are going to lose, so it's better to not rock the boat and focus on the people who can, quote-unquote, win. And advantage of incumbencies work better than people who are new to the cycles. That's what a majority of people who vote think. I mean, I make this point. I supported Nina, but not as much as I supported in 2021. In fact, I literally even point blank stated that I don't think that, like, I mean, honestly, if I were an advisor to Nina Turner, I would have told her, do not run in 2022. Do not run. Do not run. At least wait another cycle before you decide to challenge Chantal Brown again. It would be better if you waited. And in fact, in this episode, I'll play the clip from this episode a little bit later. When I mean a little bit later, after I read this last one. I was like, again, stop the whining. Because there's a lot of people that are basically like whining. Oh no, oh, Nina lost. Oh no, wah. It's like, shut up. Here's how I always viewed progressives in, like, congressional seats. We lose, we get up, we dust ourselves off, and then we move on. That's how I always view every single electoral loss that I have faced. I get up, I dust myself off, and I move on. It's like, okay, Nina Turner lost. Oh well. Move on to Sheila McCormick and Omari Hart. Like, move on. Cenk Uygur loses. Oh well. Move on to the next person. And I mean, it doesn't mean big losses can't be bad. Like, if Nina's first loss, that was big. That was really, really bad. I didn't like Nina's first loss. I didn't like this loss either. But I was like, that last one was the make or break, and this one was more of the, this is just for our, like, not for our ego, but like for us to pat ourselves on the back. Like, at least we tried. Like, I mean, legitimately, fuck the doomerism. If we took every single loss and was like, oh, we might as well just give up. It's like, give up then. And now let me play a little bit of the my analysis of the post-mortem. But back to Nina. What does this mean for Nina Turner? Now, you see, what many people don't realize is that Nina Turner was sort of seen as the next step in the progressive movement. Like, she was going to be the person that would run in 2024 as, like, the torchbearer of the progressive movement. Because she's, like, a fiery, like, aggressive progressive that could do a whole lot of good. Which is why we were supportive of her trying to run for Congress. And now I've heard a lot of people, like, crap on that idea now, saying, like, you know, why should we support Nina Turner for 2024, or even try to run her in 2024 when she's failed? Now, what I sort of agree, but also sort of don't. What I mean is, I do still believe Nina Turner is the next step of the progressive movement, but maybe we've been trying to put her in a position that she's not that good at. You see, she was good when she led our revolution. She's good at riling up a crowd, as we've seen in the presidential campaign. She's a good advocate for these positions. But maybe she should not be in the halls of Congress, but instead, she should be out in the streets fighting for these positions. Like, maybe we've been pointing her in the wrong direction for the whole time, and instead, we should be trying to push for her to be like the leader of the advocate wing of the progressive movement going forward. And someone like AOC can take up like the electoral wing of the movement. Anyways, let's get off of that. Okay, you see, that was the analysis I was making, that Nia should probably focus a lot more on activism rather than the electoralism faction. That was my post-mortem of the Nina Turner loss the first time around, and I think she probably should have stuck with that for a little bit longer, especially considering it's like, Nina went from like being that, from losing to being a TYT person and then going back to running for office. Like, I mean, running for office, it can be good for getting your name out there, but it's like, sometimes that idea of being a perennial candidate over and over again doesn't work out. But here's the thing, here's the interesting thing. I say this, but then I also gotta mention this. Her concession speech, because she said some things a little bit in her concession speech. I haven't watched the whole thing, but I've watched this section, because this section is an important one that a lot of people probably will notice a lot of things in.
And this is what I do know, that in the spirit of Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, I'm unbought and I'm unbossed. And that's why that money came in here. Because they know in the halls of Congress that I was going to shake that sucker. On behalf of the poor, the working poor, and the barely middle class. But that's all right, Pastor Early. They can't contain this black girl magic. Because what I am going to do is I'm going to take this magic all over this country and shake it that way. And baby, 2024 is coming. And I think the great state of California got something to say about what Sister Turner should do. The great state of Iowa got something to say about what Sister Turner should do. The great state of Nevada got something to say about what Sister Turner should do. But we ain't going nowhere. They just reinforced my resolve. And that just like King James, LeBron James decided to take his skills to South Beach, but what Sister Turner is going to do is to continue taking my skills all over this nation, and I'm going to see some folks in 2024. Hello?
You see, many people saw that speech and were like, she's talking about going all across the nation in 2024. That's a pretty big thing. She's going all across the nation in 2024. She's going to be going to California. She's going to be going to Iowa. She's going to be going to Nevada. I mean, many people are saying like, oh, what does this mean? Well, she's making it pretty clear what she means, because she said in a interview with Jordan Chariton, I don't know if he posted this, he probably did, but I'm just going to use the tweet anyways. He said that, like, during the status quo interview, she talks about how the squad members were threatened not to support her, and that she's considering running for president in 2024, but not even as a Democrat, as an independent in 2024. Now, again, I don't really want to say too much about the 2024 election, because, again, still a while away, so we'll have to wait and see what does Nina Turner mean by the 2024 election. So anyways, now let's move on to the next story, and this is one that you've probably already seen a million times before. Dang it. Adblock Plus. Okay, so Madison Cawthorn is getting into more trouble because video has leaked of him doing some pretty shady stuff. Basically, it was a thing that was... It was a video of him doing some... He was stimulating, air humping somebody that appeared to be a man. And the thing is, I'm keeping this up just so I can because I don't want to talk too much about like basically what had happened. Like, this is how deep the story got. You see, first the video leaked, and people were like, "Is that Madison Cawthorn? It looks a little bit like him." And then they were like, "Who's the person with him that looks like a man?" And if so, there also appears to be another man recording the video. So it's like, this is pretty weird. But then, here's how the plot thickens more. Turns out that the person in the video is actually Cawthorn's cousin. It's, oh boy, the plot thickens. And, you see, one of the big things that he's been saying, like, he's been trying to, like, go around and say, like, "Oh, look, it was just me and my friend, we were just horsing around," which is the same excuse that he's been making for, like, all the other things that have happened with him. That he's like, "Oh, we're just horsing around. But I'm gonna be doing something very controversial. I'm actually gonna be showing, let me show you. Does this look like he's playing around? Look at this bed, or like this couch, or whatever he is. Like, I think this is a good enough screenshot where it's like, you can't see enough, but like, the dude is clearly, like, you see, it's clearly like a messy room, post you know what. I mean, I'm not going to play the whole video because I don't have it. Well, I mean, I did plan to show the full video at one point. Well, not the full video. I basically always plan to show this part, just because it's like, this is the biggest proof of the pudding. This doesn't look like just him playing around. This is clearly them having some fun after, like, they got through the main course. So yeah, so that this video doesn't get flagged, let's move on to the main topic of this video. As you saw, we're going to be reacting to another one of my old videos. This is going to be me reacting to episode 104 of my podcast, Why I'm Not a Socialist Yet. It's a pretty cringe title in retrospect, considering I am one of those. The yet has happened. Hold on, let me see. Do I have like a funny... No, I gotta put a funny... Let me see. Newest first. Let me see. No, you know, I'll do that at the end. That's gonna be a funny thing I would do at the end. Okay, so I'm not gonna be right into the full thing, obviously. You see, because, like, this is, like, basically news stories, and I don't really need to talk about news stories of the time. So, we're really just gonna be focusing on, like, the main topic, obviously. So anyways, let's just get into it. This isn't gonna be a good one visually, because there isn't, like, actual visual stuff, so... yeah, let's just get into it. Now I guess we should move on to the main topic of this video, which... I don't know how long I can talk about it, because I don't know much, like, what to do, but here we are. This topic is just one that just popped in my head. I guess I was reminiscing about, like, Hal Klinsky video. Okay, so, like, this kind of is a good time capsule of how my videos used to be. See, with my podcast, I used to usually think of, like, the subject of the podcast literally right before the podcast would come on. So that's kind of why this seems a bit more like off the cuff, and why I've done a better job at trying to prepare podcasts beforehand. You know, now I have notes, and, like, I usually try to prepare, like, what the subject will be up to that point. But it's not like this is a particularly bad way to start a podcast, especially one, but, like, we're gonna be going over, like, let's just get into it more. But this is just one that I think is worth talking about, I guess. Why am I not a socialist? Now, this topic may or may not be interesting. I don't know. But this, I guess it is worth noting. I consider myself left-wing, and yet I'm more of a social democrat than a full-on socialist, like a lot of... I mean, clearly I don't think that way anymore. I'm a democratic socialist. And technically, here's the thing. Here's the weird thing. This is why I'm gonna explain a little bit about like that video, like the thumbnail. You see, the thumbnail, as you can tell, it's like me walking out of a closet with like the rose in the hand, but then it also like the socks are in the like trash. Basically, for the whole time, it was basically like I was basically just like hiding the fact that I was a socialist. I was always more. And I think I'm probably gonna use it in the video. It's this video itself, so I'm not gonna say the adage that I used to say a lot, and it still kind of is true. But I always basically was. I was always a socialist ever since the Bernie campaign, but it was basically just differing definitions of the technicalities, because I'm always like a technicality type guy. My associates, there's Nal Elkim, who's libertarian socialist. There's Pogs for Bernie, who's an ANCOM. Then there's Sunflower Socialist, who, believe it or not, is a socialist. Yeah, that was weird. I mean, it wasn't weird, it was funny, but like, that's... I mean, I'll always accept that was a funny joke. He likes sunflowers. He's also a huge David Earl supporter. Nah, he's not. No. So that was the reference of that thing. No one I know is a David Earl supporter. Not even David Earl. But unlike them, I do not consider myself a socialist. Even Bernie considers himself a socialist, but I'm not. Why? Yeah, well, why? Why is it? The answer is mixed. It's weird. Some might make sense, some you might be like, come on, dude, you're stupid. Okay, so the first reason why is, well, I mean, I guess there's another way to say it. Practicality. Practicality. Now, I mean, of course, it's a phrase that we don't really like hearing, especially with, the Joe Biden types who are like, yeah, I mean, to be fair, yeah, lefties do not like hearing the word practicality. That is true. We need to be practical and blah, blah, blah. But let's just be real. Libertarian socialism and comms, all these things are just completely the antithesis of the U.S. Now that is true. I will have to contend with that is true, that a lot of the further left ideologies are the antithesis of America, but you could also make the argument that the further right ideologies are the antithesis of America, and yet America still does some far right type stuff. For better or for worse. Mostly for worse. Sometimes a bit of both. They're the antithesis of the U.S. U.S. is all for, like, the free market and blah, 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 and all that jazz. That is harder to pitch to people than social democracy. Now, I will have to concede, like, basically, I should have said this before I started watching this video, but basically, what I'm going to guess is that the arguments that I make are technically sound, but I would just argue that those aren't necessarily arguments against socialism. They're just arguments against, I don't know, branding or further right or further left ideologies like communist. I contemplate making a video like, why am I not a communist? And then being like, yeah, on second thought, maybe I am. Social democracy is practical leftism. That is technically true, yes. Social democracy, as founded by Edward Bernstein, was basically founded to basically transition the idea of socialist thought into liberal democratic states, but that would also be democratic socialism as well. Democratic socialism is literally socialism accomplished via democratic means. It was literally made to be practical leftism. So was democratic socialism. Like, that was the whole reason social democracy was created. Edward Bernstein realized, revolutionary Marxism or the like, not necessarily that good. Not necessarily that good. I mean, there's definitely going to be a lot of people in the comment section that might not agree with that. But it's like, when I say not good, I mean good in the sense of fighting for it. Like, I mean, a revolution isn't a thing. Like, I stand by this point 100%. I'm pretty sure I'll make this point in the video, but I stand by this point. Revolution is never going to happen. Revolutionary forms of socialism are never going to take foot in the United States. Much in the same way they don't take foot in a lot of other countries. Because we are past the points of revolution. We are now in a new age, and in order for this new age to push for leftism, we have to push for it via other means, particularly democratic forms, i.e. democratic socialism. We need a more reformist way to get things done. Reformism, we need to go through the election process and, go through, all this stuff. We need to be elected. We need to... it's not necessarily cutting around the edges, but to an extent it is. He also hated the idea of, Marxists... he really hated the idea of, Marxists... You'll see why I start having, scripts for the videos now. But, I mean, not scripts, but more like... You see, now, I ramble a little bit. I ramble a little bit. But, you'll understand why I have the words. I have, a rundown of what I would want to say. This is one that definitely would have been appreciative if I had used that model. He hated the idea that Marxists had a, come on, get to the point. Very materialistic view of life. They thought that everybody saw it as, pure materialism and the like. Now, that may be mixed. It's maybe a mixed bag, but, he thought that was, harder to pitch to European nations than, a more reformist way. And I stand by that. I do stand by that. Reformist forms of socialism will be easier to pitch to people than a revolutionary brand. That's why a lot of these further left groups moderate their stances and when they moderate their stances, they start getting more well known. PT in Brazil, they were originally extremely hard left, but then they moderated their stances and brought in the tent for more left-wing movements, and all of a sudden they started getting extremely popular, to the point where they're the largest left-wing party in Latin America. And did it work? Well, look around the globe. A lot of social democratic parties out there. And a lot of them have had decent levels of successes. I mean, that isn't wrong. Labour Party in the UK. And that is technically that's a little bit of a mixed bag, because Labour is technically democratic, socialist, and social democratic. And you see, that's one of the biggest problems, I guess. Since democratic socialism and social democracy are essentially two sides of the same coin, unless you're talking about specific branches of social democracy, the ones that say that, social democracy is essentially the middle ground between capitalism and socialism, which is basically the one that I kind of started out as. But basically, those kinds of people are basically the reason why social democracy has this weird mixed bag in regards to how you view it. You'll get some sock dems that'll literally be like, I like lefties, but then you'll get other ones that'll be like, lefties are incredibly atrocious. I haven't seen that much successes now, but it did at one point. Labor parties all across the world were hugely social democratic in their mindset, and they did reasonably well in certain regards. In fact, they even pushed a lot of their nations to adopt more socialistic leaning ideas. That is technically true. That's one of the things. It's again, I'm not saying that the points that I make here are wrong, but I think I'm literally just misguided in the conclusion. The same word, basically all the same things can be said about socialist groups. Especially explicitly socialist groups. Latin America being a prime example, a lot of them are explicitly socialist and are able to do all this plus more, while also the social democratic groups are able to do this as well, but also the hardline democratic socialist groups, because of their presence. Parties in like the US were able to push to have more of a socialist viewpoint in the New Deal. So it's like kind of just a practicality sense. Social Democrats are more likely to get things done than, libertarian socialists. Okay. And I also understand, to a degree, points that I'm making that are like, people can easily turn this point around against them. Like, Hillary Clinton made these exact same points, like, oh, I'm just a moderate, I'm just a progressive that actually gets things done. And the same thing can be said, but it's like, generally, this is still true. More center-left or broad-left factions are able to get things done than further left factions, especially in liberal democracies. Like, particularly liberal democracies. Liberal democracies are usually the ones that we're trying to talk about. Like, go across the world, there aren't that many Marxist-Leninist parties that are in the center stage. The ones that are usually in one-party states. The ones, like, most of the time, further left groups have to moderate their stances to get things done. The Japanese Communist Party is a prime example. They started out as an extremely far-left group, and were basically, like, under the foot of the Chinese government. But then they started moderating their stances, becoming more democratic socialist and peace-based, and lo and behold, they started getting a lot more successes. I generally still agree with the concept, but again, I have to keep reiterating, not the conclusion. No offense to any libertarian socialists, but that's just the inevitable truth. I mean, this is coming from a person who, at this point, I probably was taking a bunch of political tests that said I was libertarian socialist. Am I ever going to get to the adage that I used to say? Like, even Bernie, he's not a democratic socialist. I mean, he kind of is. You see, it's a weird thing. Social democracy, democratic socialism, they kind of just get thrown into the same bag sometimes. See, I make this point. They basically get put in the same bag because broadly they are similar because they are literally of the same ideological branch. They both fit under the title of reformist socialism. Because Bernstein helped kind of create both ideologies. It's also kind of like why the Libertarian Party doesn't necessarily nominate their ANCAPs as their presidential nominees. It's not necessarily practical to nominate an ANCAP to be the nominee. See, I even try to compare the left wing to the right wing. You notice, again, the Libertarian Party usually nominates the classical liberals, not the ANCAPs. Like Bernie's not a democratic socialist. He's a social democrat. He is both. He's not post-capitalist. See, that's another thing. That's another thing where I definitely would probably say, I mean, Bernie, maybe he's not post-capitalist at this point because he understands that he can't be post-capitalist in the U.S. Senate, but it's also like, does he actually and it was the same thing that happened when there was this leak of somebody who leaked Chelsea Manning saying that, oh, AOC basically she moderates her stances to get things done. She's actually post-capitalist, but she basically campaigns as a sock them, and it's like, what's the point? Again, you're moderating your stances in a position where you could win. This happens. That's why there's factions between Socialist Party. The Socialist Party had this huge divide between the more radical people and the more reformist faction. That's why the reformist faction was called super socialist, both positively and pejoratively. Anyways, let me actually let this play for more than 10 seconds before I make a point. He thinks that markets can be good sometimes, but in a limited state. He wants the workers to be put at the table, but, maybe some of the farther left stuff, abolish profit and abolish private property aren't necessarily going to bode well in the private property held amazing US of A. A second reason... No, I guess I should address that before I get to the second point. Before I get to, what my second point was. Generally, again, that does make sense. The United States is heavily focused on the ideas of private property. And Bernie argues that markets can be done in a limited sense. But here's the thing, I didn't know this at the time, but there's literally a ideology that addresses this. Market socialism, where basically it's basically socialist economics, but there are limited markets. I haven't looked a lot into it. I know it's the one that Vosh has because it's at least it's mostly for foreign affairs because the world is still broadly capitalist, so a socialist society might crumble if they don't allow any capitalist interest at all. But I decry further left ideologies and certain things like abolish profit and abolish private property. I've actually kind of, at least on the second one, I've kind of mellowed out a little bit. I mean, it depends on your definition and such. I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a private property extraordinaire, but it's I mean, in a limited sense, yes, always everything seems to be good in a limited sense. Let me see, I'm trying to remember. One thing I didn't mention was nationalization, which is probably one that I would have mentioned if I thought about it. But even then, I'm actually pro-nationalization of a lot of things now. I would have been against nationalization of a lot of things, but I'm pro-nationalization of a lot of things now. So that's a different story altogether. But anyways, let's see what my second point was. It could, this all kind of sounds and the next one is just going to be explicitly my Americanness talking. I didn't necessarily grow from the leftism, from a leftist point of view. I mean, there was a podcast where I literally talked about my political journey, and as you can see, didn't necessarily come from a, Marxist-Leninist family. But, I mean, shifting in the left, but just not at the point where really, socialism is in. Okay, is that my point? What was that? I don't even know what that was. That wasn't even a point. I get that the point's probably coming in 10 seconds, but it's come on, get to the point. But yeah, generally, yes, I do understand that, and I would know because I lived that. I mean, I know some people in the youth and stuff see socialism as 100% in. I'll defend socialism when it can work, but the thing is, there's a lot of times where socialism, it doesn't necessarily work so well. Okay, let's see it. It's kind of there hasn't really truly been a communist nation. Can it really be accomplished to have a truly socialist society? Workers control the means of protection, and no government control over the businesses or I know that may be conflating communism and socialism, but same general idea. There may be just a little hint of a person inside of me that's not willing to go that far. There was a point where, there was a communist running for a decently well-off position, and he seemed really good, but I didn't endorse him because, he was a communist. That's scary. Is that my point was literally, I'm trying to think, what was my point? My point is that basically I was scared of communism, and that is true. I'll be upfront. For some reason, I didn't endorse Evo Morales in his 2019 bid right before the freaking shit show that happened with the Bolivian election. I endorsed Arce, but I didn't endorse Evo because I was scared of Evo's a socialist, so I don't know. And then there was this low level guy. He was a communist, and I didn't endorse him for his seat, even though it didn't really matter. He was this random guy of the Communist Party USA who was running in a Democratic primary, and then it was him versus a conservative Democrat, and it was that was the big debate. and I was wondering if I was going to endorse him, but then I didn't because I was a communist scary. But then, like, literally in the previous cycle, like the previous year, I had endorsed a person for like freaking... No, I think he ran in 2018, but then in 2019 I endorsed like the Allison Kennedy of the Socialist Workers Party for Dallas mayor. Okay, so my point was basically I was just scared of communism. Communism bad. No. Literally, as I say that, communist bad. Hot take, maybe it is. Nah, I'm half kidding. You know what I mean. When I say communist bad, I'm particularly talking about tankies. I try to distinguish the two, like tankies and other stuff. But, you know, sometimes it's hard to not associate the two because it's kind of the whole point of the tanks. But again, generally, I wouldn't care if people call me... Like, I mean, I got political ideology tests that call me centrist Marxist. So, yeah. Now, of course, I also think communism is just... And I don't think that'll change. Because, like, even if it's like, oh no, but the Socialist Soviet Union isn't even true communism. It's like, well, I mean, can communism actually work? I mean, to an extent, it's like... It's hard to put into words because... Like, I mean, I'm trying to, like, sum up big philosophies and, like, major things in a just off-the-cuff way. But I do say in my videos sometimes, like, some things in communism, you know, aren't so bad. But there are also sometimes where I say some things in capitalism aren't so bad either. Yeah, and I'll address that point as well. You see, I still technically stand by the first part of that point. There's some things in communism that are good. I mean, when you read like a Karl Marx quote objectively, it's like, yeah, I get it, but also I get the point of we're not gonna get to like freaking communist society in a day, but at the end of the day, is that society technically that bad? All things considered. Like, I mean, I read the quote like each according to his ability to each according to his needs. Is that a bad quote? Does that detail a bad thing? I argued no. That objectively, that is, like, that's a good idea. Literally the only thing that's scary of communism are the people who use it to basically push for, like, some socially reactionary ideology of authoritarianism. And I don't know if I'm going to get into, like, what I think are the good things of capitalism. I'm probably going to wait and see if I do talk about it before I explain. But generally, I've distanced myself from that because as the wealth gap grows and you start seeing a lot more of the flaws of capitalism, it's kind of hard to defend. The same thing happened with, like, the Medicare for All debate. Originally, I was more of the Kyle Kulinski sense of, like, I don't want to abolish private insurance, but now I'm more of the I don't care about abolishing private insurance because one too many people died of not having health insurance for me to actually be like, I'll defend not abolishing private insurance. Like, of course, unfettered capitalism is just bad, and unfettered socialism or communism, I guess you could say, is not good. Like, I mean, I know, like, Venezuela, like, I mean, I hate to use this thing, but, like, Venezuela, but, I mean, some criticisms of Maduro are legitimate. That is true. There's some criticisms of Maduro that are legitimate. Like, I mean, I'm not going to say all of the criticisms of Maduro are legitimate, but I'd say some are. Like, I mean, why is his nation poor? Well, yeah, the sanctions, but maybe in part it could be because of some of the ways he's doing his government. My problem, I guess, is with the authoritarian left, I guess. Because that's kind of like what you think of when you think of communism. But on a more practical sense, again, it's just like, you know, socialism or any further left thing is like, you can't really pitch that to like a regular person. Like, I mean, you can't, like DSA, they were talking about, like, let's abolish profit. It's like, you can't pitch that. you may want to do that, but that's not going to win you nothing. Live in the U.S. You're not going to win. So I don't actually talk about the thing about capitalism that's good. So I guess I will talk about it here. Basically, back in the day, I used to think, I still had that mentality in my brain, like, oh, capitalism breeds innovation. Capitalism, in certain aspects, you can't argue against competition. But now in fact, it's actually not even really political. It's actually like real life things that made me realize, this probably isn't as good as you think it is. Basically, one of the, and what it was basically like how every single, and I hate to use this, but it's like Mario. If you look at the sales of all the Mario games, what are the Mario games that sell the best? The ones that are side scrollers that are very basic. The ones that are innovation, the thing everybody says, capitalism breeds innovation, those are the ones that do poorly. Every single soda company has the brown soda, the orange soda, the green soda, the clear soda, the root beer. They have all those. Those are basically the same thing. Every single movie company, whenever one movie or TV show does really well, all of a sudden everybody wants to copy it. When Shrek did well, all of a sudden everybody had a realistic take on a fairy tale. When superhero movies started becoming a thing with Marvel, all of a sudden everybody wanted to do Marvel movies. Basically a comic book movie. When people started critiquing comic book movies within comic book movies, all of a sudden everybody was doing that. What if the superhero went crazy? What if the superhero was actually, a Nazi? Blah, blah, blah. Authoritarianism, all this jazz. Everybody copies each other. And that's how, what capitalism truly is you run to what makes you the most money. And what's going to make the most money is not something new and innovative. It's going to be the same old thing that everybody talks about. It's why the Hollywood industry keeps rebooting every single thing that already exists. Why you make a brand new IP when you can just reuse an old one to make money? Social democracy, it can win. Of course, you probably don't have to call it social democracy or whatever, but the ideas work. Again, look at every country that has been called a socialist country. They don't do so hot, and of course, it also could be because of other forces. And also, I should mention, everybody says communist nations and socialist nations, they don't do so hot, but USSR, they did decently well for a while. They were. This is a big one. This is a really interesting one that I'm gonna talk about. Even though my whole point of was communist nations don't do so hot, I'm literally gonna defend the Soviet Union. Number one competition, and China in the modern day, but that's because China has a different strategy. China has a socialist domestic economic plan, but their foreign economic plan, trade and stuff, is pretty free trade and the like. And actually, apparently that's not true. China's essentially a state capitalist state. So it's a mixed economy, eh? It's literally just modeling after the Copenhagen and stuff. The Nordic model. That works. I don't think that's how the Nordic model works. I think the Nordic model is different. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. This is is really stupid. I'm trying to sum up basic huge philosophies and such in a normal chat format. Maybe I should have done my thoughts on Kyle Kalinske, but whatever. You could leave a comment saying no, this is why socialism works. To be fair, I am open to it. Now, I think I should actually title this video, Why Am I Not a Socialist Yet? Because, unlike most people, I'm not necessarily opposed to socialism. Maybe opposed to certain aspects of it, or question how do we get from here to there, which is why I'm a social democrat. But you can also tell I'm further to the left like I've said this before, I'm further to the left in my heart than I am in my mind. See, I finally said it. And that's something I do still maintain even now. I'm further left in my heart than I am in my brain, because I understand that in the United States we need to be a lot more practical when it comes to running our philosophies. But then, of course, we have more idealized fantasies down the line. Like, for example, there are a lot of socialists that say, like, we need to abolish the Senate. You can't run on that. That's crazy. You can believe it in your heart of hearts, but mind, you probably can't win on if you run on an election like that. And the same thing could be said for a lot of, like, I mean, when I would take a political compass test or whatever the sort, I would always get, like, something like a libertarian socialism or a centrist Marxism or, like, democratic socialism or, like, whatever, like, a further left ideology than I would identify with, because I was basically being more practical and attributing my entire philosophy to the practicality, when in actuality, I'm just a practical socialist. That's why I essentially just changed my mind and just said, yeah, I'm a democratic socialist, because that's essentially truly socialism but practical. Because my mind is trying to work on what can we get done. Like, yes, maybe my heart would want everybody to have equal pay and everybody to be well off, but my brain knows that ain't gonna happen, so it's better to work with what we got. My heart, yeah, and I still maintain that. I've always been one of those, like, directly practical guys. That's why I've criticized people who are, like, communist or anarchist or whatever. It's like, yes, you're heart of hearts, but how do you get from here to there? I never really get those answers, but I always ask, like, how do we get from here to there? I'm more focused on the policies that we can accomplish, rather than, like, more abstract ideas. It's always been, like, why I identified with more, like, I identify with social democracy. It's the thing that's like, here's what we can do. And that's why I've just into democratic socialism, because, again, it's an ideology where it's like, here's what we can do. While further left ideologies, technically, they don't have that, because they don't have the infrastructure in the United States to be like, we can accomplish this, and this. They're more abstract ideas. Might be a libertarian socialist, but my brain is telling me, social democrat with, like, huge libertarian leanings. So yeah, I guess it really all just boils down to practicality. And I mean, like I said before, I could be open to changing, because I am seeing a lot of social democrats be all not so good. Juan Guaido and Carlos Mesa are social democrats, and also the Liberal Democrats in the UK identify as social democrats to an extent. But I mean, I'm more of the ideological social democrat, not the dumb practical ones. That was weird, because it's like, I literally just paged my whole thing on, like, practicality, and then I say, I'm more of an ideological social democrat, not a practical one. But basically, my point still stands. Like, and I don't think I mentioned this, because we don't have that much time left in that video, but I was basically more focusing on the, like, social democrats online, because we still have a lot of people who identify social democrats now on the internet who basically always left bash. And always go like, oh, the left is bad, the left is terrible, the left is crazy socialists, blah, 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 why don't they become social democrats? And I was never of that viewpoint. I always identified with the left. But I was, again, the more practical left. I mean, I'll be fair, social democrats did partly lead the way to the new Dems and the new Democrat, new Labor. That is true. They kind of opened the doors, because they were like, we're half, market, half, lefty. And then they're like, oh, let's be half of what you guys are. And it's like, not necessarily going to work that well. But, whatever. So I guess that's all I got to say in this regard, I guess. It's dumb, but, I mean, I think I make sense, or it somewhat possibly makes sense in my ramblings. So yeah, social democrats practical. Everything else is lame. Nah, I'm just kidding. Social democracy is just more practical, in my opinion. And we should probably strive to what's more practical in a leftist sphere. I should preface that. In a leftist sphere. Because, technically what Biden's saying is practical, but screw that. I want practical leftism, not practical BS. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to... this is one of those old ones where I still had Mr. B on the, end screens. Okay, so, again, basically, I would argue that my points that I was making in that video were sound. They were just leading to the wrong conclusion. The conclusion was, I am not a socialist, when the conclusion should have been, I am just a more practical socialist. Again, I argued that, and the point still stands, yes, technically, if I were, an elected official, I would probably be accomplishing more social democratic goals rather than socialist goals, but at the end of the day, I don't view them that much different. A socialist goal is essentially a goal, in my opinion, that leads us closer to socialism, and social democracy would be that. And that was always how I viewed it. Social democracy was basically the first step to socialism. Even in the first episode of the podcast, I said, it was basically so that people could basically be if they like socialism, they can continue down that path, and if they don't like it, they can go back. But what I mean is, nowadays, I'm more inclined to say, I am a socialist. But I would also, again, I keep saying, the points that I make are sound, wrong conclusion. I'm just saying, we need to be practical in how we do things. And there are certain things in a leftist sphere that are not practical. I can't run on from each according to his ability to each according to his needs, and then say, I'll get that done in a week. No. You, of course, have to run on certain things, and that was always the thing. I was more of a policy-oriented type guy. I was not more of, the philosophical lefty. There are lefties that are literally, there are lefties out there that literally take a look at philosophy books and say, this is my entire identity. My entire identity is focused on who wrote this book and what we can do to accomplish what this man wrote in this book. But I was more of a policy-oriented type of guy. We don't do the broad sense of here's the blah, blah, blah. But we're focusing on here's the policies we want done and here's how we're going to accomplish them. And that was always how I viewed it. And even then, in this video, I viewed it in that way. You could tell I was clearly trying to view it in that way, saying that it was practical for us to accomplish our goals if we ran as social democrats and the like. But again, I always identified more of the left-wing variety of the social democrats. That's why I never used the sock emoji, because I thought that was stupid. Differentiating yourselves from the left is not a good idea. It is a good thing to be part of I always even argued for multi-tendency groups. All the left-wing groups should work together to accomplish their goals. The only difference is, it was just technicalities. And I've since evolved in a lot of those technicalities. I don't think capitalism has a lot of its benefits that I thought it did. I don't think that the innovation argument or the, it's good, the innovation argument is stupid, and the positives that it had, it doesn't necessarily fit with a lot of what actually happens on our capitalist societies. And also, generally, a lot of the socialist faults that I saw, I generally have changed my mind, nationalization. I'm not really opposed to that anymore. But yeah, I guess there's all that's left to say is, well, let me see. I'll actually read this guy's argument here. I'll read this argument and see if maybe I change my mind on some of the arguments. I don't know because I'll be honest, when I typed in my reply, I don't think I read the whole thing. Maybe I did. I'm pretty sure I did. While I disagree with you on some aspects, I do slightly agree on the general idea of practicality. When it comes to anarchism and Marxism-Leninism, I don't see anarchism as being a very practical alternative to the status quo. While I draw from anarchists here and there, I'm a big fan of the notion of learn from all, blindly follow none, and Marxism-Leninism is not practical either because it has historically led to authoritarianism and abandoned the democratic essence of socialism. However, I maintain steadfast in my commitment to anti-capitalism and creating post-capitalist society, and I think that revolutionary transition will be necessary. I think that's stupid. I believe that we will have a lot to work on to do first, building working class power, and that's really like 12 politics and social democratic reforms can come into the mix. The main difference between my form of democratic socialism and that of most democratic socialists and social democracy is the anti-capitalist aspect. Dem-Socs believe that social democratic reforms in order to build a working class power to eventually create a social society and play out the class conflict to its conclusion. Social democrats seek to maintain capitalism, but put the workers on a stronger foot, in the belief that the class struggle will never truly be resolved. Bernie, I think in his heart, is a democratic socialist, not just a social democrat, because that's the really ideology that underlines the whole "not me, us" message, which is about ultimately building power for the working class. I believe Bernie is smart enough to realize that he can't run on "let's get rid of capitalism" because he knows A, he knew he couldn't get most of these done as president, and B, he knew that he wouldn't sell it because it doesn't connect with people who will have more immediate material concerns. That's why DSA focuses on more direct efforts on stuff like building labor unions, winning Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, etc. We are anti-capitalist because we believe in socialist future, and that forms our worldview, but we know that we wouldn't get it tomorrow. I'll also say I'm not a big fan of Bernstein, and much more fond of Rosa and to a lesser extent Kautsky. I feel like Rosa's whole argument about reforms and revolution being two different stages of the class struggle is a much stronger argument than Bernstein's belief that revolution was no longer needed, or if it was 100% inevitable. I'd also like to add market socialism is an idea that I'm open to. I highly recommend economist Richard Wolff and his stuff on worker cooperatives. As far as communist parties goes, I used to think that there's no way I'd ever support a communist or Marxist-Leninist party, but I've shifted my views to a more practical position in certain countries like, say, Cyprus, India, France, Italy, Japan, Austria, Iraq, etc. I'd be open to supporting communist candidates because it's more practical to do so, because the candidates have the chance of winning seats or getting in government. Getting things I support into policy requires a practical approach. Like you said, practical leftism. Communist candidates wouldn't have a chance in hell in America, but in other countries they're often the only leftist option and has a chance to do anything for the working class. That's my 2 cents. Again, thanks for the shout out. It's because I mentioned him about David Rold, and really, I guess to a degree, which I get some things he's saying, but I also think there are some things he's saying are not. Well, let me see. What was I saying? I'm way more open than most. It's just that it's a bit easier to use into social democracy than a socialist nation. Use is just way too into capitalism, ideological sockdems. See, I'm dumb. I say sockdem now. At least have the door open to socialism down the road, a sort of red pill. Though my heart seems further left than my brain. See, basically, this is the one part where it's like I mean, you can tell he's a LARPer. But basically, you can tell he's kind of a LARPer. Let's be real. Because he's like, revolution will be a thing. It's like, if revolution hasn't happened at this point, it's not going to. The class revolution is not going. We had a Great Depression. If it didn't happen then, it's not going to happen now. I'm still, I'm a socialist, but I do believe, again, I don't believe that the revolution's coming. I believe that we can transition to that through democratic means. Other countries have tried and have done some successes in that regard. But I don't believe that a revolution, at least even particularly in this current state and age, probably won't work. It just generally doesn't seem like it's practical. I mean, he talks about practicality, and then he talks about how the revolution is coming. I would argue, hold on, let me see. Bernstein's belief that revolution was no longer needed. It's like, that's kind of true. We're past the points of revolution at this point. The only revolutions that are coming are basically reforms that are so drastic they can basically be counted as revolutions. That's the only form of revolution we're getting at this point. Not really like a die-hard, on this hill kind of thing, but it's like, objectively, that's how it is. There aren't that many socialist revolutions happening nowadays. So, I mean, there's not much else I can really say except finally have to do the thing. So anyways, thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that bell to notify when a future video might comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, check my articles on the Independent Political Report, or consider supporting me on Patreon.